Okay, but I think we're still off.
Awesome.
So I don't know how to put you on stage. So I'm going to hit, I have like an on stage button on the bottom left. I don't need it.
Looks like I'm on stage as well.
Cool. I just wasn't on stage. Whoopsies. Hey, everyone. Still figuring this one out. Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Okay, so I'm going to kind of explain and then do more official intros. So we are using a new platform called RM Guild. And what's nice about it is that we can go into a little networking session directly from here. So just to let you know a little more about it, we can hop on and off stage. So I might get off stage while Josh is talking. You may chat in the chat. There's an on-stage chat. That's just for us. There's an event chat, and there's a private chat. You can see the people who are here. There's a QA. You can ask questions, upvote them. I'll be paying attention, making sure that we address that during the QA section. And then just for fun, we have some polls. This part will be recorded along with the chat. Once we go to networking, the networking part is not recorded, so and neither is the chat. So anything that you say or want to keep from there, you need to write down on your own. This we will have on demand on the RM Guild page, along with I will most likely email this out to you because I can't help myself and I like to send emails. So we will get officially started now that that is out of the way. If you have questions about how the guild works, you can pop those in the chat. I'll try to make sure to answer them. PC hardware related questions, I have no idea. So those will be going to Josh. I don't even pretend to know at this point. So we want to welcome Josh and everyone for being here. Josh, I'm going to say your last name correctly this time. Knutson. Did I get it?
Yep.
Yeah. Josh has got his start in esports in 2016 at the University of Jamestown in North Dakota as its first program director and head coach. And by that time, that was probably still something really new. After 3 years of coaching, Josh joined the team at ByteSpeed to help lead Gravity Gaming brand initiative forward. He serves mainly as a resource for new schools looking for guidance on how to start and run their own programs, offering firsthand experience learned while at UJ. Josh is also on an advisory board. He's advisory board member of the National Association for Esports Coaches and Directors, known as NACAD, and extremely active in helping the development of professional training for high school and college coaches. We're lucky enough to have him this week and next week. This week is going to be more of a beginner's guide, really focused on PCs and getting your facility ready. Next week will be a little more advanced. So we'll have him twice. So welcome, Josh. I am going to be quiet and let you take it away.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Melanie. And great to see everybody here tonight in the chat. Let me go ahead and share my screen. I'm new to Ritual Motion, so let's see if I can make this work and not break everything. Okay. Awesome. Okay, so tonight, like Melanie said, we are going to focus
Uh-oh. I will check in with Josh. Looks like we lost internet connection. All right, well, I can stall. Hope everyone's having a good time. Move on stage. Okay, I'm bringing Josh back.
Okay.
Welcome back.
Hey, so try to share my screen and it crashed the whole thing. So we'll try this one more time. I'm going to close out of some other stuff
Yeah, you can also email it to me and I can see if I can bring it up.
Perfect. Yeah, we might have to do that. But
thanks everyone for being patient.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let's do this. We'll share this screen. I'm just going to go the entire screen.
There we go.
Okay.
Hit Hertz again. Okay. Sorry, everyone. All right, well, this is me stalling. Anybody want to put in the chat what games you are working to get in there? Oh, some people are saying they won't be using PCs this time around. But I hope you join, maybe learn a little bit. If you're working on streaming, you'll maybe need some PCs to help with that. Rocket League and Smash. Those are great choices. Those are some of my favorites. Okay, let me put Josh back on stage.
Okay. Third time's a charm. We're going to email the presentation to Melanie, and then we'll see if you can do it. If not, I'll just talk, and we'll go through stuff. You won't get to see the pretty pictures, but we'll get a kind of the low-tech version of the presentation. Okay, Melanie, you should have it.
Okay. Oh, somebody saying they wanted to stream. Josh is a good person to talk to if you need streaming. Sorry, mine is now being slow.
Yeah. We'll talk about kind of like basics tonight, and then next week for the kind of more advanced, I have a lab now, what session, we'll talk a bunch about streaming there. So, okay.
Okay, mine's not working either, so you may have to do.
Okay. Well, let's do this.
I got it now.
Send the slides to everybody after we're done so that you can have the presentation, and you can look through everything, but we'll just do the low-tech presentation for tonight. Sorry about the technical difficulties. This is my first time on this platform too, and we'll iron out the kinks for next week. But let's talk about hardware, the whole reason why we're here tonight. Melanie did a great job of introducing me. The only other thing that I wanted to share is my contact info, so I'm going to drop that into the chat right now. It'll be my email at ByteSpeed and then my phone number in case you guys have questions that we don't get to tonight or you want to connect afterwards for more of a personalized kind of one-on-one discussion. But so there's my contact info, and let's get rolling. So what goes into an esports setup? That's a big question that we get asked a lot at ByteSpeed. You know, us being a technology company, a manufacturer, somebody who's actually involved with putting systems together. When I use the term esports setup, really all of that means is you have a PC, the peripherals that go with it, and then in some cases we're talking about furniture or kind of other accessories that get added into like your basic, station that a student would be playing at. So the basic components: PC tower, monitor, mouse, keyboard, headset. Maybe we're talking about desk, chair, stuff like that. But what actually goes into a machine? The biggest thing that I was going to talk about tonight is, the different components that are a part of a PC, why they're important, what the cost associated with them is, and why you as an esports coach should familiarize yourself with them or know kind of what they do. So the first kind of big list of components that we want to talk about for a machine is your chassis, your motherboard, CPU, a cooler, RAM, storage. Hey, Melanie's got it up. It's working. Storage, graphics cards, a power supply, operating system, a warranty. So we've got the list on screen there. Perfect. That's your basic components list for an esports PC. All of these pieces are important to that computer. They all play a role. They're all really things that you will want to look at when you're talking to vendors, when you're looking at upgrading systems that you already have in your school. We're going to talk about each one. So Mel, if you want to go to the next slide, let's talk about chassis. So there's a couple of different major differences with a chassis and why the pricing on one box versus another might be different. And that's mainly due to size. So you might see things like ATX, MATX, and ITX. For those of you who are familiar with PC hardware, this is going to be really basic information. But we have a lot of newbies in here and definitely want to kind of lay the groundwork for people who might not have that background. So the MATX, the ATX, and the ITX, that's the size of the motherboard that would be compatible with that case. So ITX systems are smaller. It's a mini ITX board. ATX is typically your full-size motherboards, and we'll talk more about boards in a second. And your MATX is, they call it a mini ATX board. So the different size of motherboard, the amount of things that can plug into that board, you need extra space for all of those different components. And typically larger and smaller cases that cater towards the ATX and the ITX boards, those are typically a little bit more expensive because the majority of parts might not fit in a small form factor case, or we're adding extra space, extra steel in the case, extra material to allow for more accessories to be plugged in and things like that, which adds to the cost. Fan capacity and radiator support is the other big size thing. So you see the 120, the 240, and the 360 millimeter dimensions on there. That refers to the number of fans that can go in that case. So on the front of a typical chassis or even the top, you might see something called a radiator. And that's just helping to disperse heat. We'll run, the fans, or if it's a water cooler, have the whole closed loop of water cooling will be connected to a rad, and that's the space where heat gets dispersed. Larger the case, the larger the opportunity to have more fans in there, and typically you have fans that are 120 millimeters each. So it might be a 1, a 2, or a 3 fan setup, either the front typically or the top of the case. And all of that adds cost. If we're talking, a 360 millimeter case, it's compatible with a nice big radiator. A lot of fans can go in there. We've got a full-size motherboard. All of a sudden, now we're talking about a really big piece of hardware, which increases the overall cost. Other things that kind of contribute to the cost of a case or what might be considered entry level versus higher end. If they have a privacy shroud or like a power supply shroud, something that hides that power supply, built-in cable management, if there's grommets or tie downs on either the front or the back side, just extra kind of nice to haves. Drive bays, if you're plugging in multiple hard drives or you have multiple SSDs that you want mounted to the case, included fans. Sometimes those cases actually ship with 1 or 2 fans already attached to the case. Typically, it's usually like a rear fan that's included. Sometimes you'll get a fan at the front of the case. And if they are included in with the actual chassis, that typically will add cost to it. And then finally, tempered glass versus acrylic. A lot of cases, and actually the ones that we'll look at today, for the example builds that we're going to look at, ByteSpeed, we have tempered glass side panels, it's an aesthetic thing. It's nice to have. It's not necessarily a requirement when you're going out and looking for machines, but there's some cool things that can be done if you have that glass panel on the side of the computer. You can actually look in and see the guts. And it will definitely add to the cost if you have a tempered glass panel versus just like a metal plate encasing all of the different parts. So that's kind of like a high level look at chassis. They're pretty cut and dry when it comes down to it, but size and cooling compatibility are the biggest two things that add to the dollar amount of a chassis. Typically, a cost for something like an entry level, box might be around $50 to $60. On the high end, we could be talking, over $100. And there's definitely a quality difference the higher up that you go. ByteSpeed, our typical chassis cost is right around $80. We typically stick with something like the Fractal Meshify that you see on screen. That's one of our premium kind of higher end chassis. And we stick with a build like that because it's good, high quality. There's lots of added features that we like to be able to have, like the cable management, like the extra space. And that's kind of like a great option for building out an esports system. And they look great too. Let's move on to motherboards and our next slide here. So you can think of the motherboard as the skeleton of your PC. It's going to be connected to all of the different components that go into a box. The motherboard is going to be one of the biggest, comparatively the biggest costs. Because there can be a lot of features that go into a motherboard and a lot of reasons to, add to a cost or reasons to want to choose one motherboard over the other. Like we talked about, size comparison is definitely one of the major considerations. That ATX, MATX, and ITX, you definitely want to make sure that your size of motherboard matches up to the size of your chassis so that I don't buy a motherboard that's too big for the box that we chose, and then all of a sudden nothing fits, and I can't actually build in that system. On the opposite side, you don't want, for aesthetic purposes, cable management, you don't want a motherboard that's too small for your box. You might not be able to have things reach to where they need to, or it just might look a little weird sitting in that case. CPU compatibility, this is a very entry level thing. But motherboards often will go whichever platform you're choosing. So Intel versus AMD. And that's the style of CPU that you're going to be putting in that system. So you want to make sure that if we're going with an Intel i5, for example, we want a motherboard that is compatible with that CPU. And that's the small square in the middle of the board where the CPU actually sits. The pins and the different standoffs for the coolers will be the biggest difference between the two, AMD versus Intel. Number of RAM slots, obviously, if we're making the board bigger, we have extra space to add things in. So there are some motherboards out there that only have, 1 or 2 slots for you to put a stick of RAM in. RAM is the piece of the machine that's going to carry instructions from one place to another. You can think of it like office workers in an office building. RAM is the little workers that carry files and other things around the office building. And if we want more of them, we have to find offices for them to live in, or RAM slots that we can stick a stick of RAM into. So if we have motherboards that have 4 or 8 or higher, those will come with a premium price tag. But a lot of motherboards nowadays come with 4. The other kind of bigger considerations to look at, PCIe slots. This is going to be important for things like your graphics card, which is definitely the biggest cost of building out a gaming machine. Is the actual graphics card. And we'll get to that in a second. But we have to have a slot for that to go into. And a lot of times PCIe slots also are for other accessories that you would plug into a machine, like a capture card or extra devices that might not come, stock with the motherboard. So PCIe lanes can be 1x, 4x, 8x, or 16. The most common ones being 4 and 16. And really all that means is the size of that PCIe lane and, you know, what can plug into that slot. You know, like I said, Wi-Fi adapters, capture cards, video cards, all those things will plug into PCIe slots. And you want to make sure that the motherboard that you're choosing and the build you're choosing has enough slots to support the number of accessories that you want plugged into the machine. Let's see. Other stuff to look at, VRMs is really just, well, excuse me, I should back up. M.2 slots. M.2 storage is kind of the new gold standard as far as SSDs is concerned. And we'll talk about storage in a second here. But not all motherboards have more than one M.2 slot. So it will limit the amount of SSDs or hard drives that you could plug into a machine. And oftentimes more M.2 slots means more dollars, which means your motherboard is going to be more expensive. VRMs is the last thing we'll talk about for major consideration. And that really is like the nitty gritty part of the performance in the motherboard. VRMs is how the board actually delivers power across all of the things that are plugged into it. So you want to make sure that, you know, you're not choosing a really cheap board that can't deliver power to everything that you have plugged in. Or you're going to run, you know, your GPU at less than ideal clock speeds, or your RAM's not going to perform the way it should, or, you know, so on and so forth. So pay attention to VRMs. Usually, you know, especially for modern day gaming builds that you're going to buy from a manufacturer like ByteSpeed, it's not really something that we ever have to look at. But if you're working with older systems and you're upgrading, you know, maybe machines that have been in the school for a little while, that's definitely something to look at, especially if you're adding in new hardware to an older machine. Other stuff that just kind of adds to the dollar amount, or, you know, adds to the overall look and feel of a motherboard. Heat sinks, that's kind of like the big white things that you see on the board there. Just how it performs and how it disperses heat across the machine. You want to make sure that your temperatures for your motherboard are low, so that you're not overheating things like your CPU, and you don't want to fry the whole system. So some motherboards have built-in heat sinks or larger heat sinks because they run hotter, because they have more features that they're running. It kind of all stacks up in a really logical way. LED support, if you want your machine to have, you know, LED lights, a lot of times that is an added feature to a motherboard that, you know, if all things are equal, the LEDs are going to cost more. It's not much in the grand scheme of things, but it does contribute to whether or not it's considered a gaming motherboard a lot of times, because a lot of gaming motherboards just mean that, hey, we have built-in LED support. Wi-Fi versus LAN, not all motherboards, not all computers have Wi-Fi just built into them. So, you know, a motherboard has to have that compatibility, which adds to, you know, your overall price point. For esports, you know, the best, you know, gold standard, you know, you always want to be plugged into a wired Ethernet connection if possible. It's going to give you the best experience overall. Sometimes it's not an option. You know, sometimes we're forced to, you know, play with what we have, and you know, we have to go on a Wi-Fi connection. So you want to make sure that if you're buying a desktop, it has the ability to actually connect to Wi-Fi or have a Wi-Fi adapter plug into that motherboard. And then kind of the same thing, other I/O ports. I/O is just input, output, you know, the things, the USB ports, the display ports, all those things that are on the back of a computer that you plug into. You know, the more options that you have, the larger the board needs to be, which means the cost is going to go up. So I know this is a ton of really technical speak that we're throwing at you, but it can kind of show, you know, a good rule of thumb. The more features that a part has, the more expensive it's going to be, but sometimes, you know, the better it's going to perform. Melanie, that's about it for motherboards. So let's go to CPUs. The CPU is, you can think of it as the brain of the computer. It's the one telling the other things plugged into the motherboard what to do, and it's the one that's actually driving, you know, what you're doing with your computer. This is going to be not the most expensive part in the system, and not necessarily the most important part, but it's definitely up there in like your top two. CPU and graphics card are definitely the top two things that you want to pay attention to when you're building out a system or looking at quotes or working with a vendor. That's going to be where a lot of the performance comes from. A lot of the cost is also going to come from your CPU. So major considerations when you're looking at CPUs, you're going to see things like cores and threads. Now, the number of cores that are on a CPU, just kind of as dumbed down as possible, or kind of as basic as possible, the more cores that a machine has, the more things it can do at one time, or the more work it can handle at one time, the more resources it can devote to accomplishing that task. It's a little bit of a misnomer because not always, you would think, oh, more cores I have, the more things I can do, the better my machine will be. It's not always the case. You want to pay attention to a couple of other things and then follow that rule of thumb that, more cores is generally better, but it's absolutely more expensive. So two things that if we can look at CPUs as a whole that I want you to pay attention to is IPC, which stands for instructions per clock cycle, and then clock speed. How fast the machine can actually go, how fast the cores can actually be utilized and the amount of work that it can do. Not all cores and threads are created equal. That's where that, more cores is not necessarily better. If I have a processor that has 6 cores, but they only run at a certain speed, and I have a machine that has 4 cores, but they all run faster, that's a consideration that you're going to have to make. Oftentimes, the higher clock speed is what you would want to go towards. And that's because for esports, not a lot of games utilize more than a couple of cores. You could look at a machine, something like a Ryzen 9 3900X, and you could say, oh, yeah, this is got, it's a dozen cores, or it's, I'm going to get the souped up version of an i7. I'm going to go the unlocked version. It's got more cores, more threads, yada, yada, yada. That's great for multitasking and things like streaming and editing. Maybe it's other curriculum work that you're going to do in the school. But for gaming, a lot of times it's just a little bit of overkill, to be honest with you. We found in benchmarking and building out systems at ByteSpeed that oftentimes your i5, your Ryzen 5 3600, your more, what a lot of people would consider entry-level CPUs, do an amazing job at running titles like League of Legends, Overwatch, Rocket League. When they're paired with the right RAM and the right graphics card, those entry-level systems can do amazing and can perform and not break the bank. When you're looking at those higher-end CPUs like your i7, your i9, Ryzen 9, Ryzen 7, etc., those really only are worth the money when you're getting into I want to do more with the machine. I want to actually maybe it's streaming gameplay or recording commentary or something like that. Multitasking is the biggest thing where you would need a processor upgrade. So, most people don't need those higher end CPUs, especially if you're building out a lab for esports and we're just going to be gaming. We're just playing League of Legends on these machines. That's all they're being used for. An i5 or a Ryzen 5 is really all you need as far as the CPU is concerned. Next slide, Melanie. Okay, coolers. This is going to be about as cut and dry as possible, and that's a good thing because we're a half an hour deep, and I'm sure you guys are all falling asleep because of all the technical speak. Coolers, there's 2 main styles, fan and air, or it might be called liquid for the other style of cooler. Water, liquid cooling versus fan and air. In general, a liquid cooler is going to be more expensive than a fan. Both are great. A lot of the times you don't need a water cooler. It's cool. It's fun. Yes, they do perform at a higher rate if you have them tuned correctly. And maybe you're doing some applications where you have to run a CPU cooler where, liquid cooling is the way that you want to run. Maybe you're running a ton of different programs in the background. Maybe you're running, really intense software rendering, where a liquid cooler is something that you need because it's going to perform a little bit better than a fan cooler. Most of the time, you can get away with just your normal stock or basic aftermarket cooler that's a fan. And that sits right on top of the CPU, keeps that nice and cool, and it lets your machine perform the way it's intended. Things that contribute to the cost, stock coolers, things that are packaged with the CPU, they come directly from Intel or AMD. Those are going to be cheaper in general. Aftermarket, something made by Cooler Master or Fractal Design or, Lee & Lee, the list goes on and on and on. Those are going to be more expensive because that's a manufacturer that is just creating a fan to be sold, as an extra to a machine. If it's got LEDs, if it's got lights, it's going to be more expensive. Size, we already talked about 120, 240, and 360 millimeter fans. The number of fans in your rad or the number of fans that your case can hold. Size is going to be a contributing factor to cost. And then noise level, an entry-level fan or something that's a little bit cheaper might not be as quiet. And if that's something that's important to you, maybe it's worth looking into a better aftermarket cooler. Typically, the noise level stuff only really comes in with your stock coolers. And actually, the AMD cooler that we have on the screen, that's the stock Wraith Stealth cooler from AMD. And that's actually something that we use in almost all of our AMD builds. It's a great stock cooler. It runs cool. And it performs super well, and it's cost effective. And we usually don't need to add anything extra than that. And that's fans. Next slide, please, Melanie. So RAM, again, this is going to be a really important piece of your build because the RAM allows you to do more things at once. They work in tandem with the CPU. Think of it, like I said, that office building. RAM is your office workers that are carrying files from one place to another, doing what the CPU, the boss of the office, is telling them to. RAM comes in 8, 16, 32, 64 gigs, et cetera. For gaming purposes, for things like esports, 16 gigs is more than enough. And usually if all you're doing is gaming, that's really all the RAM you need. RAM is a spot where you see diminishing returns for gaming performance once you get to a certain point. And that point is usually 16 and maybe 32 gigs. A general rule of thumb, if you're building a gaming system, 16 gigs is what you want to shoot for. If you're going to stream or do stuff in the background, like capture audio or video or run programs in the background, like analytics, things like that, that's where, maybe it's worth it to run 32 gigs. For esports, you will never have to go higher than 32. And I will say that with the utmost certainty right now. And it's really overkill to go higher than 32. Speed right now, 3200 megahertz is kind of the gold standard for RAM. It is really just, as fast as that RAM can run, the amount of data it can process, the amount of work it can do during a given time. Generally, if your RAM is, I think the lowest speed RAM that is really commonly sold right now is 2666. Which for esports, for kind of your general competitive gaming, totally fine. The industry standard is moving towards 3200 as the floor, the spot that, everybody will say at least 3200 megahertz and then higher. And really for esports, if you've got 3200 megahertz, that's going to be absolutely fine. Considerations, for cost, obviously quantity. If we've got 2 8 gig sticks, in a machine, it's going to cost less than if we had 4 8 gig sticks. Cast latency is on this screen, and I honestly, for today's purposes, you don't even need to really worry about it, other than the fact that CL16 is kind of like the industry standard best for gaming. And a lot of gaming RAM will have that stamped on it right there, and it's not something that you're going to have to worry about or dive too deeply into. The other thing, and probably one of the most important things that we'll talk about as far as RAM is concerned, is dual channel versus single. And what that means is if I have, one stick of RAM running at a time, or if I have, 2 sticks of RAM running dual channel. So in general, one 16 gig stick of RAM will perform worse than 2 8 gig sticks running in dual channel. It's just kind of the way things are set up with current motherboards and utilizing RAM to the fullest extent that its performance is rated for. It's better to do dual channel than just one single stick of RAM. And if it's got LEDs, surprise, surprise, it's going to make it cost more. LED support, as you might have caught on, adds to the cost of every part under the sun. It's not a big cost. But it does contribute to, that overall price point. Next slide, please, Melanie. Okay, storage. Couple of things. Storage, again, is we're really into kind of like the cut and dry version of these parts. Storage, there's 2 major types: HDD, which is just hard drive, versus SSD, which is solid state. Solid state comes in 2 flavors, SATA versus PCIe M.2. And really, that's just the type of storage. On the screen, you see a Seagate hard drive. That's a mechanical spin drive that runs at a set speed. It spins up, it reads your data. It's got typically slower read-write speeds. They're going to perform slower than your SSD. They're going to be cheaper. And oftentimes, you can have a larger hard drive than a solid state, whereas an SSD, whether it's a SATA or an M.2, will be able to access data faster. It'll be able to read and write data faster, helping your load speeds, loading in the assets of a game, making sure that the computer has, files for the RAM to carry. You can kind of think of it that way. These are the file cabinets that open up and have the files inside of them. Most builds that ByteSpeed puts together nowadays don't even have a hard drive in them. It's just one single solid state. Typically 500 gigabytes is good enough for esports. We're not storing, unless you're playing things like Warzone or some of the really large AAA titles out there. Typically 500 gigs of SSD memory is enough for your operating system. And, if we're going to put the League of Legends client on there, or if we're going to have Rocket League installed on there, it's going to be more than enough space. It's going to keep your costs down. It's going to perform great and really, give you the best of both worlds as far as performance and price point. Capacity definitely is the biggest contributing factor. Once we get into the typical ranges for an SSD, especially 250, 500, and a terabyte. Once we get into 2 terabyte, 4 terabyte, and up, now we're talking, big money as far as that little stick of memory or stick of storage in your machine. If you are going to have a ton of stuff stored on a computer, say you're not working with network storage, or you have to have things that are installed on the machine, and it's going to be multiple terabytes worth of storage. What we would recommend as a system builder and as somebody who benchmarks machines and builds them for the competitive environment, put your operating system and maybe like the games that you play the most on an SSD, and then have mass storage on a hard drive where we can get, 4, 8 terabytes of storage if, we're storing video files or things like that. Put that on a hard drive, save yourself some money. And make sure that you're using an SSD for the stuff that matters. A lot of times that operating system and hey, if we're gonna play League of Legends, that's what we're having on the SSD. And then all my game film, all my other games that we're playing, maybe not at a competitive level, but we still have as an option for our students to come in and play. Maybe that stuff gets stored on a hard drive where performance isn't the most important part. Next slide, please, Melanie. Okay, graphics cards, the big one. This will be, unless you're building a very niche build, the graphics card will be the most expensive part in your system. The graphics card it's really essential for gaming because it's what's going to take the heavy lifting and converting the data that is a part of the game into what you see on the screen, what you see on your monitor. And it is absolutely one of the most important and most expensive pieces of the machine. As far as graphics cards are concerned, there are a couple of different things to keep in mind, to look at, because this is, like I said, what's actually rendering stuff on screen. VRAM is something that until recently, more is better, typically. NVIDIA has kind of made that not the case anymore with their 3000 series cards, because, the 12 gigabytes of VRAM on a 3060 are not necessarily better than the 8 gigabytes of VRAM on a 3070. And that's just, how the card actually reads data, how it uses its VRAM. Those types of things will affect the performance. In general, if you're looking at a system and you're looking at a card and you see, okay, I have 3060, 12 gigabyte. Anything over 6 is generally going to be great for esports. In some cases, you can get away with a 4 gig card if all you're playing is like League of Legends. You used to be able to say that you could run League on a toaster. So a 4 gigabyte super entry level budget VRAM card might be good enough to get going and to get started. But for most esports titles, if you're looking at that gigabyte number on the graphics card, anything more than 6 is going to be great. A lot of the higher end cards are kind of between 8, 10, and 12. And the architecture of the card, how it actually utilizes that VRAM is going to be more important than that overall number. Is it 6, 12, 8, 10, whatever. Memory type and PCIe generation, that's probably just getting into the weeds a little bit too much. But a lot of times you'll see like a number like GDDR6, and that's just kind of the memory type for the graphics card. That's the style of VRAM. For regular RAM, you might see like DDR4, things like that. Again, it's just the type at a very basic, explanation. It's just the type of RAM. And then PCIe generation, usually it's not really a big consideration because 3.0 and higher, is usually, great for esports. You might see graphics cards now that say that they're PCIe Gen 4, which, that's great. There's not a lot of motherboards out there, especially at the entry-level price points, that can actually take advantage of PCIe Gen 4. And it's just running things faster, being able to hit higher clock speeds, access data faster, convert it into images. Moving forward, you're going to want in the next 2 or 3 years to watch out for PCIe Gen 4. But for right now, as long as it's Gen 3, you're totally fine. And honestly, it's not even something that really you need to be worried about in building out a system. Other cost contributors, LEDs, again, coolers, again, sometimes they make aftermarket coolers for graphics cards. A lot of like boutique shops, or if you're building like a high-end personal computer, you could put something like a water cooler, a liquid cooler on a graphics card. You don't need that for esports, so I hate even talking about it and bringing it up now, but it will contribute to cost. And then finally, the last part that we're going to talk about is power supplies. So Mel, if you can go to the next slide here. So power supply, this is like the heart of your machine. This is the paycheck of those office workers. This is definitely something that is easy to overlook, but it's absolutely still important. And it's pretty straightforward too. Power supplies, a lot of people will have a misconception on wattage. A lot of times they'll be like, oh my gosh, I have to have an 850 watt power supply because they saw that on some internet forum where it was like, oh my gosh, this is the best. That we got to have a higher wattage number to run everything on our gaming computer. that is only sometimes an actual thing that you need to look at. The wattage number, that overall like 650 watt, 750 watt, 850 watt, you're going to want to make sure that that number lines up with what else you have plugged into the computer. If I have a bunch of accessories, or I have a super high-end graphics card or a super high-end processor, yeah, maybe I might need that 850 watt power supply. But for esports, for just a normal gaming machine, a lot of times you can get away with just a 650 watt power supply. That's going to be more than enough power to make sure that the graphics card has what it needs. You're going to have the RAM running at full speed. You're going to have your fans and your coolers and everything else going. 650 watt is usually good enough. There's two main styles of power supply, and that's modular and semi-modular. So the top one that you see on the screen here is the semi-modular power supply. That's going to come typically with like your 8-pin power connector cord and a couple of other cords already plugged into it, or it's going to come with those, and you're not going to be able to remove those or customize what cables you have in there. But you'll have the ability to plug in, maybe a couple of SSD cables or other accessories that you would plug into that power supply. Whereas like a modular power supply doesn't come with any cables plugged into it directly, from the start. And that you can really say, I just am going to plug in just what I need. You're not going to have extra cabling that you have to shove in and hide inside of the chassis. And it really gives you the customization to be able to only plug in what you need. Power rating is the last thing that we'll talk about as far as power supplies goes. That's that, you'll see a bronze certified power supply, or a silver, platinum, gold, the list goes on and on and on. As long as, a general rule of thumb, as long as it's a bronze rated power supply or higher, it means it's going to run at an efficiency level that we can trust. And that's generally going to be a great power supply for whatever device that you're building out. Really, as long as it's got a rating, that's great. That's all we need to look for. I would strongly caution against power supplies that don't have some type of a rating attached to them. They're just not reliable. They don't perform as well as stuff that does have that certification rating on it. Most ByteSpeed machines that we pump out for esports have a bronze 650 watt power supply, and they perform great. They last a long time, and they will be able to run entry and a lot of mid-level systems. Okay, Melanie, next slide here. Okay, so 2 extra things when it comes to an overall PC build that a lot of times get forgotten because we're focused on hardware and that's it. And we're thinking, okay, I'm going to go to PCPartPicker.com. I'm going to build out this big list of parts. I'm going to build my system, and it's going to cost this much. And then you go to a vendor, and all of a sudden it's $200 or $300 more than the list of parts. That extra cost a lot of times comes from operating system and warranty, which a lot of times are not included on those websites like PCPartPicker.com. It's not a slam against those resources because they're great. It's a great website to be able to go and build out a system. But a lot of times you have to remember about operating system and warranty because they're typically forgotten about. And an operating system, and we're talking about Windows here because a lot of games, a lot of esports titles do not run on Mac OS. They don't run on Linux. So we're talking about Windows when I talk about an OS for a gaming machine. That can cost you anywhere from $75 to $150 or more, depending on what level of license you're getting. A lot of schools have access to something called Microsoft Shape the Future, which is a discounted education-only Windows license. It's a Windows 10 Pro license, and it will be Windows 11, I believe. We haven't heard that Shape the Future is going away with Windows 11. But it's a Windows Pro license that you can get for a dramatically reduced price. So a typical Windows Pro license costs like $130, $140, $150. A lot of times schools can get that for $60, $70, $80. So if you're an esports coach and you're wondering about operating systems or you've heard that, talk to your IT department or whoever is managing your devices and see if you have access to a Shape the Future license. It will save you at least about $100. The other, biggest determining factors, home versus pro. A lot of times, an education environment, a school, a college, you'll need a Windows Pro license to integrate with the rest of what you have on campus. Sometimes you'll have a blanket upgrade license to where you can get home and upgrade it to pro. And those are things that are good to look into. And then warranty. Warranty is something that when you look at a machine, it is a huge cost saving to take years off, but it's also a huge benefit the longer you're planning on keeping a machine. I don't know a lot of schools that can afford to replace a computer every single year. So, a lot of times esports teams, especially in high schools, they need to buy a computer that's going to last them 3, 4, 5 years. If you don't have a warranty that matches the lifetime that you want that machine to run, you're operating under, a risk. If you're covered for the first 2 years under your warranty, what happens when your $800 graphics card dies? Call up the manufacturer or the vendor that you bought it from, say, hey, our graphics card, it's not working anymore. Okay, we can warranty that and get you a brand new one for free. If it's out of warranty, now all of a sudden we're on the hook for $800, as a number. It's a really expensive part that I have to, buy a new one straight up. And that's not always possible. So warranty, if you're looking at it, ByteSpeed, we value a year of warranty at $100. So if I have a machine that, we're pricing out at, $1,500, for example, and it's got 5 years of warranty, maybe the real value of that machine, maybe that's at $2,000 or maybe it's, somewhere in the middle based on how long that warranty is for. For ByteSpeed, we warranty all of our K-12 desktops, all of the high schools that we work with. You're getting a 5-year warranty on all of that hardware. So, it doesn't matter if it's the CPU, the GPU, the chassis, we warranty that for 5 years because we know that, like I said, a lot of schools don't have the ability to buy new hardware every single year, and you want that to last. So pay attention to the warranty, especially when you're looking at quotes. Next up is kind of just a real quick breakdown comparatively about all of the different parts in the machine. So Mel, if you can go to the next slide here. Yep. So an example build, a mid-range PC that we can look at, a Fractal Meshify case, a B550 Steel Legend, Ryzen 5 5600X, Hyper 212 cooler, 16 gigs RAM, 500 gig SSD, entry-level GPU, a 1660 Super, that standard power supply we talked about, and a Windows 10 Pro. This is kind of what you can expect the lion's share of that cost to come from. You'll see the graphics card is the highest part on here at 30%. The next is the CPU at 20 and the motherboard at 15. Those three parts are where the majority of your price is going to come from out of a machine. And then RAM, cooler, storage, all that stuff, it adds up quickly and it's all about the same. So that gives you an idea of what we're looking at as far as the overall breakdown. Mel, if you want to go to the next slide, the average, that machine that we just talked about retails from ByteSpeed with a 5-year warranty for $1,650. I'm looking at the poll we set up at the beginning here, but what the average cost of an esports PC is. We had a couple of votes for $1,000 to $1,250, which 2 years ago, you'd be absolutely correct. We had most votes come in at $1,250 to $1,500, and then another vote, for the $1,500 to $1,750 for the average price of a build. And it looks like everybody kind of got this right. Unfortunately, PC parts have gotten a lot more expensive in the last year due to the pandemic and availability and a lot of things. You know, if we had 4 hours, we could talk about logistics and shipping containers and all that good stuff. It used to be that we could build a gaming machine for $1,000 or $1,200, and it would be an awesome entry-level, mid-range system. You could confidently run that for 5 years, no worries. Now that number is more so in that $1,250 to $1,500. The build that we had on screen is actually more of a mid-range build. It's got brand new parts. It's got some things like a premium chassis in there. So if we go to the next slide, an alternative build to what we just looked at would be a different chassis, different motherboard, different processor, different cooler, same RAM, same storage, same graphics card, same power supply, same Windows license. This build would kind of be like the gold standard for what ByteSpeed is doing right now, especially at the high school level. If we go to the next slide, this build will retail for exactly what everybody thought. $1,375, free shipping, 5-year warranty, lifetime tech support. So you guys got it right in the poll about what the average cost of a system is. And that is definitely up from years past, but it's still not too bad. So if we're looking at budgeting for a full, system, a full setup, if we go to the next slide, the nice round number that I like to tell people when you're looking at budgeting for esports equipment, you should be looking at $2,000 a station. And that's kind of thinking that $1,375 number for a PC. It's got a 5-year warranty. It's got great parts in it. It's going to be able to play all of our esports titles, maybe not on ultra settings, but it's going to be, able to play them competitively. The kids are going to have a great experience, but it's not going to break the bank. That gives us the budget room, if we're thinking $2,000 per station, to get a gaming monitor that runs at 144 Hertz, a half a millisecond to a millisecond response time, runs at 1920 by 1080. It's got the gaming specs, the refresh rate that we need to be competitive. And it also gives us room in our budget for mechanical mice and keyboards that will perform better, they'll be more responsive, they'll last longer, and then a headset with a microphone and some noise-canceling headphones for team communication. Sometimes this budget will even let you get something like a gaming chair or an extra accessory thrown in there as well, depending on the build of your system. Some average costs, a gaming monitor is probably going to run you $250 for a high performance rated monitor. Peripherals, you could probably bet around $50 to $75 for a mouse and keyboard and headset. If we're thinking all of those things combined, about $75, $50 a piece, along with that 250 monitor and the 1,400, call it, gaming station, you're going to be right around that $2,000 mark. And that's a great number to be able to take to your admin to say, hey, we need to buy equipment. Here's what we expect to spend on a machine right now. And with that, I think it's a great time to go into the Q&A here. We do have a couple of preloaded questions, but I want to get to the stuff that's been thrown into the Q&A section now. So Mel, you could probably even stop sharing your screen and we can jump in here. First question here is there a noticeable difference in PC and console performance during esports competition? That is a great question. And it brings up kind of the larger conversation about consoles versus PCs. A lot of times consoles will only run games at a certain FPS. They might not be running at the same performance level as a PC. You're going to be able to get better hardware into a PC compared to what you're looking at for like a Nintendo Switch or a PS4 or a PS5 or something like that. Consoles are a great way to get your foot in the door with esports. There's some titles like Super Smash Brothers that are only on console. So that's a great way to add that title to your school, be able to get your foot in the door for $300 versus, $1,300, because a console is definitely cheaper than a PC. But you're going to be limited in what you can do and the performance of that device. Next question, what is the best way to educate your IT team about esports gaming? For instance, our IT director assumed that laptops at the school would work. Let's see if I can make this bigger. Oh, maybe that's the whole question. Okay, so the best way to educate them about esports is to pull up the minimum recommended specs on the games that you're going to be playing. That will give you an idea of like the bottom of the barrel that we're going to be needing to be able to play those titles. And that will, then your IT director is not going to be like, okay, a Chromebook's not going to work because it doesn't have that hardware in it. The other things that I would look at is reach out to your Play Versus reps. They're going to be able to give you some guidance on, what games are being played in the season. You can reach out to vendors like ByteSpeed. We can kind of give you the best bang for your buck kind of options as far as benchmarks go, and kind of looking at competitive style gaming and the specs that we want to hit. Those would all be great ways to show them. The other thing that you could do is have them try and play a game on that device. And see what their experience is running on, a lighter weight device. And when they, try and play Rocket League or Overwatch and it doesn't work, they'll understand that, like, hey, okay, we need to get a little bit higher hardware.
I dropped our hardware network specification list in the chat as well. So if you need to use that.
Awesome. Okay, next question. For schools that may need to commit to a 1 year, then a 3 year, then a 5 year plan for funding, what is the best recommendation for getting the core of what you need that can be upgraded? That's a great question. And I would say for your 1 year plan, you should fundraise for the bare minimum devices that you would need to play. And I personally would still say go for PCs. So if we're going to have a League of Legends team, fundraise for 5 computers and just really put your effort into getting 5 good devices that are going to last you 5 years right away. And that way, when it comes to year 3, instead of buying brand new everything, maybe we just have to buy 5 additional machines and now we have 10. Really, I would say commit to getting good devices first that are going to last you longer than I'm going to spend $500 on, a used lightweight machine now that I'm just going to have to replace in 3 years or 2 years anyway. So from my personal experience in starting a college program and doing that, we started with 15 machines. And then we expanded to 24. Then we expanded to 35. We looked at what our ideal spec was for machines right away and said, we're going to spend the money to get the minimum devices that we need, make sure that they last us a very long time. They're going to outlive their warranty. They're going to play games at the same performance level as the stuff that we can get in year 3 and year 5. And that way we're not, refreshing the entire lab every single year. You can also look at starting with console gaming, and that would be a great thing to do in year 1. Maybe it's, hey, we're just going to start a Smash team, or we're going to, jump in with some of the other titles that Play Versus has, running that are on PS4 or, and Xbox. And starting in year 1 with just a couple of console games, maybe your game library and the number of students that get to participate are going to be a little bit smaller. But that'll at least get your foot in the door. It'll let you start building your program and then have that goal in year 3. Okay, now we're going to buy a lab of PCs or something like that. But great question. Next one. What is the general suggested monitor size and hertz? Awesome question. The gold standard for esports and what you should look for is 24 inches for size. You don't need anything bigger than that. 24 inches is kind of just the perfect perfect size before you start getting into weird screen resolutions and tearing and things like that. But a 24-inch 144 hertz monitor is going to be the gold standard. It's 90% of the monitors that we sell as a company are going to be that spec. And that's kind of a general rule of thumb for best performance for every kind of style of game. And it's going to run at the level that you would want for competitive programs. And then finally, the last question that we have in here, what is the difference you'll get from a gaming laptop, a gaming desktop, a gaming mini PC? That's easy to summarize in a short explanation. Absolutely, this is an awesome question. A year ago or 2 years ago, I would have said, forget about laptops. Don't do it. It's a terrible investment. Nowadays, I have changed my tune. Where mobile gaming has made the biggest leaps in the last year and really the last, I'll say the last year. Discrete or integrated graphics on mobile machines have gotten so much better. They've been able to, really line up well with kind of like your entry-level desktop GPUs. And if you can get a great model with a good processor, good, onboard GPU or discrete graphics card, and then make sure that the RAM is there on your laptop, it's going to give you a good entry point if you need to be mobile. There are a lot of schools where they don't have this big, lab room that we can just take over, put a bunch of desktops in, and then have that live there permanently. We worked with a school in New Rockford, North Dakota, who didn't have classrooms. They went one-to-one a couple of years ago with, I think it was even like iPads or something, or Chromebooks or something like that. So there were no labs in the school. They didn't have extra classroom space. So the library is where they're setting up for esports. And they needed a mobile solution or something that they could set up and tear down at the end of the day easily, and then store in a space where, you didn't have general students coming in and messing around with them. So they went with 20 laptops and are loving it. They're high performance rated gaming laptops that are, $1,600 a piece, but they give you that great performance and, the longevity and looking at the games that they're playing and what they need them for, and the ability to be able to be mobile, set up and tear down. A gaming laptop is a great option nowadays. You will still find more flexibility and more powerful devices in a desktop because we can get full-size parts in a desktop. So, if all things are equal and we're putting a laptop up against a desktop, I would choose desktop every time. But sometimes we don't have the ability to make that choice. And mini PCs, Intel, actually, we're a big Intel partner. We're a titanium technology partner with Intel. They have this thing called the Extreme NUC. It's a small form factor mini PC that they've actually been able to get, the same level of mobile graphics into that shell. It takes up about the size of my hand and runs Valorant at like 300 frames a second. So the performance has gotten there for the smaller desktops, those small mini PCs and the laptops nowadays. Whereas like a year or two ago when I started at ByteSpeed, I would have said absolutely no way. I've definitely changed my tune, and it's a great question to ask. All right, let's see. We had a couple other questions kind of pre-submitted before we got rolling here. So I'm going to just kind of answer those real quick. How is billing calculated? That is a great question because of that kind of example that I gave earlier with, hey, I went to PCPartPicker.com, I picked all my parts, and now, that dollar amount that it showed me doesn't match up with the quote that, a ByteSpeed or a Dell or an HP sent me. There are a couple of different things that go into that. We already talked about operating system and warranty adding to that cost. There's also going to be a manufacturer's markup. We have to be able to, make money so that we can keep building systems. So there is going to be a little bit of a markup in there. I couldn't tell you what the competitors are doing, but it's probably, there's not a lot of margin in hardware. And people think that they can get rich by selling gaming PCs. It's really not the case. We're not making a ton of money on gaming systems. And for a vendor like ByteSpeed, who works with schools all the time, we want to make sure that you guys have a great price. But there is a markup in there for the manufacturing. And then, kind of overall, as far as, we talked about parts cost, warranty, operating system, and then a markup for the sale. Let's see. Other things that go into billing that, or the cost of a machine that we didn't really talk about today. Availability is one of the biggest things that we're seeing challenges with now, especially right now with coronavirus and just the state of the world. NVIDIA and other manufacturers that are just making individual parts are not able to pump out the volume that they used to be able to. So the high demand for those parts and the limited supply are driving prices up. And that definitely contributes to the overall price tag on a machine. Next up, what items and hardware do I need to stream each student's computer back to one main computer? And like I said, this is one that we'll briefly touch on today. And then I would encourage you to come back next week when we talk about what to do after you build out your lab. But there's two ways that you could do this. One, you can run HDMI cords and capture cards from multiple devices back to one machine and have all of those inputs coming back into one device. And have a capture card that's going to be able to read all of those inputs, and then add that into like a broadcasting software like OBS or Streamlabs or something like that. That is a good way to pull in multiple feeds, but the streaming machine that's going to need to do that needs to have a lot more RAM. It's got to have a better processor. It's got to have a lot better video card. And you're going to need some type of accessory or receiver for all of those different inputs. And that adds up real quick. So that's one way to do it. You could have something like a video switcher or something that you might see in like a TV station as the central hub for all of those inputs. The other way to do it is running some software called NDI. And that's it's a broadcasting platform that uses your network to capture images of what's going on one screen and then send that and read that on another device connected to the same network. We definitely don't have time to go into that tonight, but if you want a little bit more information about NDI, I'd be happy to schedule a call with you and go through that because it's something that we used when I was at Jamestown to stream some of our more like laid back titles. It doesn't work great for super high action titles. So like Overwatch is not something I would use with NDI, but like Hearthstone and League of Legends to an extent would be better titles for that. Let's see. Best way to gain funding. I'm gonna put a link in the chat for a page on the ByteSpeed website that has a bunch of funding and grant opportunities linked on it. We've kind of built out just a page that has grants that we know schools have gotten. They're education focused, they're career and tech ed focused, and they're for schools to be able to get funding out there. So not only is there a bunch of resources in grants like that, but there's also schools that are using their ESSER funds, their ECF funding, the stuff that, the COVID dollars to be able to, relieve budget pressure on the IT department so that they can buy machines or they're using it directly to pay for esports. One other thing that I would say is that if you're looking at dual purpose devices, so something that's going to be used for esports, but we're also going to do curriculum with it, that is a great way to split the cost of those machines and get extra dollars so that it's all of the burden doesn't go on one department. If you can split it between athletics and academics or underwater basket weaving or whatever department it's coming from, if you can share that cost and use those devices for more than one thing, it's going to help the school in a lot of different ways. And that's actually one of the best ways that schools can get funding, is to say, this is going to be used for Project Lead the Way or Carl Perkins, style activities, career exploration, things like that. Oh, by the way, at 3:30 when school's done, the hardware inside this machine is good enough to be able to play esports titles. Let's see, starting from scratch, so I don't know anything to ask yet. That's great. Come back next week and we'll talk more. And then finally, I guess we have two last questions. Best budget to build, we kind of talked about that already. If you have that $2,000 price point per station, that's a great dollar amount to kind of base your budget off of and think about, okay, this is the hardware cost that I'm going to have, and then look at, the other costs that you would need for your program to build into your overall budget. And then finally, pre-built versus DIY. As a vendor, I am going to say that DIY is something that you can definitely do to get started, but I would recommend doing a pre-built system. And that's not because I want to sell computers. That's because a lot of issues can be avoided if you're starting from scratch. If you're having somebody build it and warranty that device, that's going to be the biggest thing. The peace of mind that you get from a warranty, no matter how long it is always going to be worth it when compared to, okay, I'm just going to order a bunch of parts and we're going to build it ourselves. It's a great activity for you to do with your students and give them that experience of building a PC, which is awesome. But from a peace of mind standpoint, from a warranty standpoint, from a value standpoint, I would say looking at a pre-built system is something that I would recommend. Especially right now when like an end user trying to buy a graphics card, you might be buying one for $1,000, and that's just one part with how the market is right now. Whereas going to a company like ByteSpeed, I can give you actual MSRP on a device instead of something that you're paying scalper prices for or dealing with availability. We have channels to be able to get inventory from manufacturers, whereas like going out to Amazon or something like that might not be the most reliable way to get a lab. You might be able to build one machine, no problems, great, awesome. But when you're talking about higher quantities and then especially warranty, that's where a vendor like ByteSpeed or Dell or HP, that's what we're here for and where we, have our strengths. So that's it as far as questions. Unless anybody else has anything they want to talk about or grab, I just want to say thanks for letting me present this week. I know the majority of that presentation is really going to go over a lot of people's heads. It's not stuff that we need to worry about from a really high technical standpoint, but it is good to kind of get yourself familiar with where the costs are coming from, what each machine is doing, what each piece of the machine is doing. And to be able to talk to vendors or talk to your students about what they're actually using. It's great to have that entry-level knowledge.
Thanks. I really appreciate having you here, Josh. So what we're going to do now is we are going to end this session and go to a networking session. I'll give you a little spiel about how it works before we go, because then I will lose you all into your chats. But there'll be little circles that are like tables, and you can hop in and out. You can have your own one with somebody else. You can hop in one with other people. You can do it based off of what you want to talk about, or if you want to talk with a certain person. Again, those aren't going to be recorded, so we won't be able to save those if you have an excellent conversation. So it'll pause, and then it'll push you into a little circle, and then that's when you can change. You can mute yourself, you can share your screen, you can do all the things that a presenter could do in a panel, just with a smaller group. So if no one has questions before we go to there, I'm going to end and push you to your circles.